We've talked a lot about homeowners associations and how those homeowners are affected by fines and in some cases liens and possibly losing their home. Who we haven't heard from are homeowner association board members, and that's all about to change today, at least when talking about a former board member. Joining me now for Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates is investigator Anastasia Olmos. Hi, Stasi.
Hi, Brendan, the chief investigator. Brendan Keefe, introduce yourself too.
Of course, Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe here, but this is your story, and it's an important one because this is a huge issue affecting so many people throughout the state of Georgia, and it really does have two sides, doesn't it?
Yeah, you know, I actually had a flashback right now to a past conversation we had probably a couple months ago where I put out a call and I said, I want to hear from HOA board members as well, because we kept getting tips in from homeowners who were dealing with these huge issues with their HOAs, possibly, you know, facing losing their homes, some over $100,000 in fines. I mean, just unimaginable circumstances. And the board members, when we go to knock on the door, of course, you know, they don't necessarily want to go on camera and talk with us about these situations. We've gotten a few responses, but this time we actually heard from a former HOA president of one of the neighborhoods that we had already been in, and she said there's always two sides to every story, which we know as journalists, and she was willing to sit down and talk with us, not specifically about being the board member of his time there and the issues he was facing, but just all of the stuff that she dealt with and really give us that perspective of what association board members go through.
I would never take someone's home away and make someone homeless. Never, ever, ever, never.
Jan Keene is speaking up for those who volunteer to help run their community associations.
It was a very difficult period. It really was.
While working as a travel nurse, Jan served as the HOA president, secretary, and board member at large in the Cedar Lake Townhome subdivision in Kennesaw when it was first built in the early 2000s.
Because of the strict rules of the TOA, the property values have increased by 86%.
She says the HOAs abusing their power are giving the rest a bad rap.
All these Facebook posts for Karens and Darrens and HOA presidents harassing people. Gosh, people, get a life.
You may recognize this pond from a previous Atlanta News First investigation.
The scene of the crime is this north-facing side of my house.
77-year-old George Watson is facing a foreclosure filing on his home from the current HOA board after violation notices went unopened in his mailbox for months. Fines for not pressure washing his home and leaving a bucket of water and a ladder on the side of his house quickly grew to thousands of dollars in past due fees.
It very possibly means that I'll lose the house.
When we went to ask the current HOA president about George's case, she told us,
you will need to call our property management company
okay,
or our attorneys.
The management company, Tolly Community Management, told us in part someone choosing not to read their mail is not an association issue. The covenants for the neighborhood state that the notice shall be sent by U.S. mail. The attorneys did not respond. Jan has nothing to do with the current fines or foreclosure filing, but says
no one is a victim who's educated.
And by educated, she means homeowners should do their research before buying a home.
You need to ask for the last quarter's financials to see if your community is in good standing. Ask for the debt ratio, how many people in the community are not paying their dues, because that is a sign of a very sick community.
In Georgia, sellers and realtors are not legally required to tell a buyer there's an HOA. Real estate attorney Randy Williams suggests checking the community name in court records for any HOA rules you'll have to follow.
You better read the governing documents before you decide to purchase in that community, because you're going to be bound by those documents.
In Cedar Lake, water utilities are included in homeowners' HOA dues. Jan says they never garnished bank accounts or filed foreclosures when she was on the board, but instead they shut off a home's water if the homeowners weren't paying for their share.
There's always a way. Foreclosing on someone's home, I cannot in my heart see that happening.
What can the state of Georgia do to change that?
Legislate clearer. Yeah, as you have mentioned, with the Georgia laws, maybe an ombudsman program of some sort, where people can go to voice concerns.
And you heard right there, she suggested an ombudsman, and that would be kind of an oversight office for people to go take complaints to. That's not necessarily what state legislators are looking at right now, which some of the bills from last session, Georgia legislature, they are looking to continue into this year. One of those, which is already getting hearings right now in the Senate Rules Committee, is Senate Bill 361, and that hits a couple of areas. One, it requires HOAs to register with the Secretary of State's office, which would give them a little bit of oversight power. They would have to submit their financial records so that people could see them. The second thing that this bill would do would raise the threshold for filing a foreclosure on a home from $2,000 in liens to $4,000, and it would require that to be only unpaid dues, not fines. So as we know, a lot of the issues come from these fines, which are not capped. They can be pretty much anything. They're supposed to be reasonable, but if you put a couple $100 fines on and give some late fees and possibly interest, right away that homeowner is at risk of having a foreclosure filed on their home. So that would be $4,000 of just unpaid dues. And then the third part of this bill would actually look at putting the HOA dues under the mortgage and giving the bank that power of a foreclosure, taking it away from a homeowners association. These are some of the things that are in the bill right now that they are hearing. The next hearing is October 21st, where they're going to be listening to what the banks have to say about this.
Okay, so I want to drill down into that a little bit. What you're talking about is escrow, right? So
Yes.
if you have a mortgage, you pay, a lot of people escrow their property taxes and their property insurance. They wrap it into their mortgage payment. And so they're paying the bank, and then the bank would pay the HOA, right?
Right. Yes. And with this, they're really just in the preliminary hearing of what this would entail. So we don't have the exact details, but at the Senate, they are holding multiple sessions. We'd even gone to one with Senator Donzella James, where she's looking at a couple other areas of HOA law. And so what we're truly trying to do here with our investigations on HOA nightmares is just kind of spell out a lot of the issues. For instance, we have gone over this over and over and over again, and we mention it here in this story, is the rules that HOAs have to follow. The bylaws, and then the rules that the members have to follow are the covenants, and how those are filed and how those are voted on. And even just simple things like that, if it's not done right or according to what's called the declaration of those covenants or the bylaws, then homeowners have nowhere to go, and they're having to hire their own attorneys to fight possibly corruption or fraud or something going on in the community. There's no state office that oversees these issues.
Interesting. You know, I know you and I have talked about this quite a bit, but the bylaws, as you just said it really well, basically are the rules the board has to follow, the corporation, if you will, of the HOA. And then the covenants are the rules everybody agrees to that then the board can enforce. What's interesting is right now those are filed in two separate places, aren't they?
Yeah, correct. So you've got the rules that the HOA has to follow. That's going to be filed with the Secretary of State's office. It doesn't mean that just because they're registered as an HOA or a nonprofit and they've filed these documents that the Secretary of State has any rules or regulations or even takes complaints. Like we've checked with the Attorney General's office, hey, have you gotten complaints on this neighborhood of this HOA or even this builder for this community who may be involved with this HOA? No. And then that's only where you're going to find the documents. You're not going to get any oversight from that office. And then if you're looking for the covenants, it really is, if your courthouse has their documents online, it's pretty simple to just go to the real estate records and search your subdivision, your community name, and it should pop up there, kind of sift through the deeds and get that out of the way. There's usually filters and things, but you should be able to find those documents. And if you've seen anything from this story, you want to do that before you buy the home.
Yeah, it's called due diligence, and it's something that the buyer is required to do. Some banks will require with a mortgage that in order to approve the mortgage, or at least the closing, they want to make sure they see the covenants because they also could be on the hook for some of these things in terms of a failed payment or default or something to that effect. So by the way, those covenants are found in the Superior Court Clerk's office in each county, is that right?
Yeah, so technically I would go to the Superior Court's website, and then you have an option for to click civil, criminal, or real estate. So I would click real estate and search there.
You know, this kind of overlaps or dovetails with Sierra Cummings reporting on misdeeds, because what you're saying is just like the Superior Court clerk is only responsible for essentially accepting and sort of filing those covenants, just like they were in the deeds in her case, the Secretary of State, it's a ministerial duty, which means the Secretary of State can't approve or deny or investigate. They pretty much just have to say, okay, you paid the filing fee, here's the documents, we're going to file them. They're just basically like the library in this case, the keeper of the documents, and they don't have any enforcement. Is there any state agency that has any enforcement, or are homeowners just left with the civil courts to go to?
We have done our due diligence and found that there is nowhere that homeowners are able to go to file complaints. We've heard that they've, filed police reports. We've checked in with some of these police reports, and they're told, civil matter, you can take this to court unless, they were on your property, et cetera, et cetera. They're getting into these issues of paying hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars into an HOA, mandatory dues. And these homeowners, many that we've gotten these tips from, or, emails in, or people that have filled out this form that I've created online, they're saying, I've never seen the financials. I've lived in this community for 10 plus years, and there's no one they can go to say, this is not happening the way that my covenants say it's supposed to, or my bylaws say it's supposed to. Their only option is to go to court. I talked with an attorney just yesterday in depth about all of this, and he told me that he is even turning people away constantly because they will end up owing more money by the end of the dispute in legal fees than just paying $2,000 for not cutting their grass.
Wow. There also seems to be an imbalance here because the HOA board has the power to enforce its rule, covenants and dues and fines and fees, some of which may be arbitrary, on their own part. But they're able to enforce that by putting a lien and foreclosing on a property to, enforce that lien. Mm-hmm. But yet the homeowners have no enforcement mechanism to go to in the state. The only enforcement mechanism they have is trying to overthrow the board by going door to door and having people meet the number of petitions in the bylaws, right?
And we've talked about that too on these podcasts before. I've been in communities where they have done that. I'm even talking to an HOA members right now who have gotten more than 100 signatures saying we want to vote in. We are holding a meeting. We want to hold a new vote. Here's who we want to elect, and the management company is giving them pushback. So it's not even just the board that's saying, no, you can't do this, but now the management company, the people who are supposed to be there to be the professionals, they're saying, are putting up some fences for them, not literal.
Well,
fences,
the management company is supposed to work for the HOA, and the HOA is supposed to be the homeowners.
Yeah.
The board is just representing them. There is one thing you pointed out,
Mm-hmm.
I think in the piece that's really important to note, and that is that these board members are volunteers.
Oh, yeah.
And so that for all of the horror stories you've shared, there are all the untold stories of people doing exactly what they're supposed to do. We don't report those because we report the unusual, not the usual, the extraordinary, not the ordinary. But day in and day out, there are board members who, no one else wants to run for the board because no one wants to have to do these jobs because, as she said, she's answering emails every night, this hours a day of, chasing this stuff down. And then also you have to be your neighbor's policeman, which is never a comfortable situation unless that's kind of what you're into.
Having to shut off water on your neighbor, that I can't imagine. That's the least, of the consequences really there. She could have filed a foreclosure if the lien, exceeded $2,000, whatever it may have been, but she's got to make those decisions morally based on her neighbor. And like she said, water utilities was included in the HOA dues. And if you do not pay the water company for your water can get shut off, your power can get shut off, different things like that. And so the HOA kind of was taking that responsibility on. If we can't provide your water, we're not that sort of entity, that's not signed off in your rent type of thing. So really asking her that question of what is the solution? And she, it's encouraging to hear her say that there really is always a way forward. you know, the positive. She said she loved serving in that community. She did love that community. She's since moved back to her hometown of Augusta, and now she has a voluntary community kind of just group where they hear the crime stats and they talk about, you know, holding Memorial Day events and things like that, which is really nice. But she says she wouldn't recommend one or the other because she really did love her community and the time that she spent there serving the community while working as a full-time travel nurse. She wanted to be close to the airport and be able to get around the United States, but really, you know, she just wanted to speak up for those board members throughout the state that are doing it because they care about their communities.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to put you on the spot now. As you know, our opinion is irrelevant, and we don't even entertain our own opinion when doing these stories.
Right.
However, we do analysis because you have now more information on HOAs in Georgia than probably any other disinterested third party. You're currently a renter, correct?
Brendan.
Sorry to put you on the spot, correct?
Yes.
Okay. It's behind the investigation, so we're pulling back the curtain. If you are in the market for a home at some point, are you going to consider HOAs or are you going to try to steer clear of them?
You know, it's funny because I already know my answer as you were asking that, and I was thinking, am I legally allowed to say this?
Well, of course you're legally allowed to say it. It's just, but this is based on analysis versus
Okay,
opinion.
all right, I'm gonna say
Looking
it.
at all the facts, and maybe it's not a concrete answer. You tell me.
It's a concrete answer.
It is, and what is
Yeah,
it?
Absolutely not. I wouldn't.
Absolutely not an HOA.
I would not.
Okay.
It's a scary thing right now when I'm hearing all of these stories. And even as a renter, you know, I take on a lot of renters' rights stories, and it's just, at the end of the day, it's like, well, you got to go to court. You got to go to court. And it's too much of a risk unless there are some changes that happen in the state for both homeowners and HOA boards.
Interesting. Well, remember, the single largest investment you're ever going to make, most people, is buying a home
Yeah.
and choosing where to buy that home. But as part of that, the idea that you can buy a home and then somebody who lives in your neighborhood can tell you what you can and can't do with the home you're paying for. The flip side of that, though,
Pool house.
and then you
A pool,
sometimes,
yeah.
you sometimes you get those
Yeah.
amenities, right,
Yeah.
that you're paying into.
Dog park.
But there is one other thing, though, and I sort of argue the opposite argument for living in an HOA is, if I'm going to invest all that money, I want to make sure that the neighbor next to me mows their grass and doesn't have a field growing there, or they don't have a car
Hoarding
up on blocks
situation, yeah.
for months when I'm trying to sell my house, and now that's cutting into my property value. So that is the flip side, and I guess it is a decision everyone has to make.
Yeah, what is best for you and your family? And if you would like to share your story with us, we have a form right now. We actually have a full page where you can find all of these stories, as well as more on your rights, more on the legislation we were talking about. Go to our page, atlantanewsfirst.com. We have an Investigates tab, and under there you will find HOA Nightmares, and you can fill out a form there as well to get in touch with us.
Well, you say that no one in Georgia is holding these HOAs accountable, but Anastasia Olmos is. Thanks for joining us, investigative reporter. You've been watching and listening to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates.
Thanks for tuning into Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. For more on this story, go to atlantanewsfirst.com and click on the ANF Investigates tab. You can listen to more award-winning investigations wherever you get your podcasts by searching Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First. And tune in Sundays for an hour-long episode of Uncovered, where we highlight some of our biggest investigations that impact our communities.